Some of the most recognisable and memorable scenes in TV and movie history come just seconds before a dramatic death. In that moment, a character can be hit with the realisation that they're about to meet their maker and they have no choice but to accept it. On occasion, this death is heroic and their demise was carefully planned in order to save others. More commonly though, it's something they could never have predicted and have to make peace with pretty damn quickly. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie for What Culture, teaming up with Sean and Will to give you the 49 best I'm Dead and I Know It TV and movie moments. Harry knows he's blown it. Speed. Public transport can get a bit hairy at the best of times, but it's not every day that you hop on the bus home and find out that it's been rigged with a bomb programmed to detonate should the bus drop below 50 miles per hour. The rigged up bus will eventually have to drop below 50 if it either runs out of gas or hits an obstacle, putting the LAPD in a race against the clock to find the terrorists responsible for it and keep the bus's occupants alive. Officer Harry Temple believes he has tracked down the terrorist's name, identity and home address. He gathers a squad to raid the house, bursts into the empty home, only to notice at the last moment a small red blinking light. He knows exactly what it is, and he realises that the house is imminently going to blow and kill everyone inside, himself included. He doesn't try to run or shout, he just looks straight forward as his lip quivers and his eyes take on a glassy, hopeless sheen. Knowing that the perpetrator was a previous member of the bomb squad, how did you not see that coming? Stringer Bell, The Wire. The Wire is a series that could offer up a whole range of truly worthy I'm Dead and I Know It moments. If we have to pick just one though, it's the execution of Idris Elba's Stringer Bell that gets the nod here. Unlike many of his cohorts, Stringer wasn't solely all about the crime and carnage. Instead, by the time of his demise, he was attempting to look for a better life, with a career in real estate seemingly in the crosshairs for Bell. Sadly for Bell, his past misdemeanors would be his downfall, with his former partner Avon Barksdale giving Bell's location to Omar and brother Muldoon. As soon as that pairing found Stringer, he realised that his days were numbered. Despite initially pleading his case and offering up money to Omar and Muldoon, Stringer knew that there was no way out of this particular pickle, going on to deliver the phenomenal "well get on with it" line, which was interrupted by gunshots as Stringer Bell was killed off in cold blood.
Daniel Jackson, Meridian. Does this really count as a death scene for Daniel Jackson? He is exposed to a fatal dose of radiation in the same breath that we're introduced to Jonas Quinn, which unfortunately would feed into how some of the audience felt about Jonas going forward for the 6th season, but that's another video. Throughout the rest of this episode, Daniel is slowly dying, and it is immediately established that the SGC does not have the resources to combat this dose of radiation. Daniel knows this is it. Now, this is where it becomes a bit of a cheat. Before this episode, Daniel had met Omen Desala, who was one of the Ascended Ancients, who comes to him now and says that she can help him ascend to a higher form. Great. Sound. Not gonna die. What's he doing on this list? There is no coming back from this. You don't nip back for a cup of tea. Following on from this episode, yes, Daniel returned every Thursday for an out natter with the SGC, and then returned full-time in season 7. Contract negotiations. But in this episode, it really did look like it was it for Daniel Jackson, and it was sold beautifully.
Nuke to the guts. Broken Arrow. John Woo's famously trashy mid-90s action film Broken Arrow wraps up with the fittingly bombastic demise of antagonist Major Vic Deakins. In the final battle, Deakins and hero Captain Riley Hale are fighting over a remote control which can arm or disarm Deakins' stolen nuclear warhead, which happens to have been stashed on board a train. In the end, Hale beats Deakins down and grabs the remote, which he uses to deactivate the nuke mere seconds before the train carriage housing the nuke crashes into the halted carriage in front of it. The impact causes the disarmed nuke to be catapulted forward with incredible force, giving Deakins just enough time to stand to his feet as he realizes what's about to happen. As the nuke travels towards him like a bullet, he smirks knowingly, seemingly taking some sick satisfaction in how thoroughly demolished he's about to be. The impact of the nuke would surely kill Deakins instantly, but to rub salt in the wound, he's catapulted into a bunch of flaming barrels, causing him to explode in what is truly one of John Woo's John Wooiest scenes.
Marty gets a pretty crap death. Independence Day. As iconic as the whole of Independence Day is, one of its very best moments comes from someone you really wouldn't expect it from. Jeff Goldblum's resourceful satellite technician David manages to stay pretty level-headed as he finds out that an attack of unprecedented power is about to decimate the world. He instructs his colleague Marty to get out of town, channeling his chaotic nervous energy into something that will actually do him some good. Unfortunately, it's just a tad too late. As David and the presidential posse board Air Force One to fly to relative safety, the countdown comes to an end and the alien ships release a series of energy beams that turn everything in the surrounding area to dust. People are running, screaming from their impending fiery death, and then there's Marty, sat in his car staring directly at the incoming wall of flames. In what's possibly the most understated final words ever, he just manages to say "oh crap" before he gets blasted into oblivion. His slack jaw and wide eyes say it all. He knows there's no escaping what's coming. Amongst all the yelling and crying, you've got to respect that.
Sokar, the devil you know. The Goa'uld are not very nice. I would, in fact, rush to say that they're kind of really when you get right down to it. They like to pose as gods. One of them, Sokar, liked to pose as the devil. Sokar was the commander slash ruler slash despot of many systems, but also the moon of Natu, which was kind of like a prison hellscape planet. SG-1, along with Martuf of the Tok'ra, end up on this planet in a rescue mission to save Selmak. It goes pretty badly to begin with because they get thrown into a cell. Now, there is an overarching Tok'ra plot to blow up the planet. There is also another person there who is not a friend of the Tok'ra or the SGC, and that's Neonak. Neonak is in fact an alias of Apophis. Apophis was the main big bad of at least SG-1, the TV series, for the first couple of seasons. Now, Apophis and Sokar, not besties. Oh, I forgot to mention the Tok'ra blow up Natu. Yeah, they blow up the moon, which means Sokar is caught in the destruction of his own prison planet in a sort of a horrible, ironic twist for the Goa'uld.
Bob Newby, Stranger Things. Sean Astin's Bob Newby was a character who, quite frankly, didn't bring all that much to the table for most of Stranger Things' second season. The new lover of Joyce Byers, Bob was a relatively dull character who audiences were hoping would do something of note. But boy did Newby step up in a major way by the time all was said and done with his time in Hawkins, Indiana. That moment to shine found Bob effectively embracing his own death as he volunteered to head to the basement of the Hawkins lab to reset the breakers following a power cut. As soon as Bob put himself forward to venture down to the basement, the character must have been aware that his chances of making it back alive were minimal. And that was indeed proved to be the case, with Newby mauled by a group of demodogs. Fortunately for the rest of the characters, Bob was successful in getting power back to the building, even if he wasn't quite as successful in making it back to Joyce, Mike, Hopper and Owens. All we can say is rest in peace, Bob.
Mauled by a merman. The Cabin in the Woods. In Drew Goddard's delicious horror satire The Cabin in the Woods, Steve Hadley is one of the room technicians responsible for operating the central ritual. Hadley expresses a deep desire to see the merman show up as one of the ritual's selected monsters. Given that he's never seen the creature, and in the film's insane climax, he most certainly gets his wish. When the heroes press the purge button, which releases the incarcerated monsters into the facility, a wounded Hadley finds himself coming face to face with the merman, which slithers out of the darkness to Hadley's fascination. After a few beats of staring at the monster though, Hadley snaps back to reality and quips with frustration, "Come on," noting the irony that his first sighting of the merman will also be his last. The merman then makes short work of Hadley, mauling him and spraying his remains through its gills. Beautiful.
Green Goblin's moment of clarity, Spider-Man. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy was nothing if not thoroughly aware of its own silliness, and perhaps never more than during the climactic battle between Spidey and Norman Osborn's supervillain alter ego, the Green Goblin. At what appears to be the conclusion of the fight, a defeated Osborn feigns contrition, begging Peter Parker's forgiveness for his rampage of terror, all while secretly teeing up his bladed glider to impale Peter from behind. However, when Norman sends the glider hurtling towards Peter, the hero uses his spider senses to leap over the glider, causing it to fly directly into Norman himself, fatally impaling him. Hilariously though, Raimi opts for a slightly fourth wall breaking moment before Norman is hit, stripping away all background sound effects and focusing simply on Norman as he realises he's about to die. The only sound he's able to make is "oh," before then immediately facing the consequences of his own actions. It's as though in this brief aside, Norman had a fleeting moment of mental clarity before being rather violently shoved off of this mortal coil. Zorg gets his comeuppance, the fifth element. Anyone with a name like Jean-Baptiste Emmanuel Zorg should never be trusted, and throughout the film we see that Zorg really is just a nasty piece of work. He's working for the great evil that everyone else is seeking to destroy, a clear indicator of a bad moral compass. And that hairstyle! I mean, just looking at him you know he's a bad guy. It's very satisfying then that he gets such a pathetic death. As our heroes escape in Zorg's own private spaceship, he's forced to return to the scene of the crime he just committed in an attempt to obtain some very valuable stones. He deactivates a bomb that he prepped, anticipating being gone by now, but doesn't realise that he's not the only one with explosives to hand. A fallen member of the alien race he previously employed detonates a bomb of his own, and as the realisation hits Zorg that he's about to die the fiery death he was condemning others to, all he can do is stutter and utter a lowly "oh no" before he's blasted to smithereens. Good riddance, I say, good riddance. Jimmy Darmody, Boardwalk Empire. Killing off one of your two main characters after just 2 seasons was always going to be a risky move for Boardwalk Empire, and it still splits opinions to this day, whether offing Michael Pitt's Jimmy Darmody at that point in time ended up being detrimental to the series. Boardwalk Empire would go on to run for 5 seasons by the time it wrapped things up, yet there's no getting away from the fact that it was at least a little tough to get used to the show without Pitt's character being front and centre, or at least alive. By that point, the father-son relationship between Nucky Thompson and Jimmy had become extremely strained, and for Jimmy, he found himself in a downward spiral deep in debt, a failed liquor business, drug and alcohol issues, and he'd even kill his own father. Spoiler alert. When Nucky promises to help fix some of these problems by having captured Bill, the guy who killed Jimmy's wife, it's all just a ruse designed to get Jimmy out in the open where he'd be killed. The thing is, Jimmy is well aware of this, even before he sets off to meet Nucky. The thing is, to Jimmy, his real self died in the First World War. As such, he sees his execution at the hands of Nucky as ending the misery that has become his day-to-day existence.
You arrogant ass! You've killed us! The Hunt for Red October. The Hunt for Red October's thrilling climax sees Soviet sub V.K. Konovalov fire a torpedo at Red October, but the vessel manages to make an extreme evasive maneuver, which ends up causing the torpedo to fire directly back into V.K. Konovalov itself, blowing it to hell. In a tremendously satisfying moment, Captain Tupolev, the commanding officer of the Konovalov, gets a few seconds to soak in the fatal magnitude of his failure, as his executive officer scolds him, "You arrogant ass! You've killed us!" And because that's not humiliating or awesome enough, director John McTiernan gives us a sharp close-up of Tupolev's sweaty, terror-filled brow just before the vessel is blown to smithereens by its own weapon.
Tommy gets made, Goodfellas. Even though Goodfellas' Tommy DeVito was a raging, volatile psychopath whose demise was seemingly inevitable, it's still strangely depressing when Tommy gets whacked near the end of the film in retaliation for killing Billy Batts. Tommy is tricked into believing he's about to be made, but when he's led down to the basement where the mafia initiation ceremony typically takes place, he opens the door and sees the room inside is empty. The lack of people present for this ceremony allows Tommy to quickly realise he's about to die, letting out an anguished "oh no" a moment before he's shot in the head at close range. It's a testament to Joe Pesci's superb Oscar-winning performance that we can feel even mildly sad about DeVito's death, despite the fact he was a violent maniac who was clearly asking for it.
Ra. Stargate 1994. I cannot overstate just how good Jay Davidson was in the role of the ultimate system lord, Ra. He was the first Goa'uld that, as an audience, we ever met. Jack O'Neill, Daniel Jackson, Major Kowalski, they went to Abydos when the Stargate was activated for the first time. However, they were quickly overpowered by Ra's forces. Handily enough, O'Neill had brought along a thermonuclear bomb. Now, when it comes to the climax of the film, Ra's ship takes off and it's in orbit. Now, on board that ship is Daniel Jackson, who had gone there to save his new wife, Schrader. Down on the planet, handily enough, right beside some rings, which are transport devices, there's the bomb. Now, through a series of unfortunate events, the bomb is activated, it can't be turned off. Daniel rescues Shaoray, it's all a bunch of fun, he gets back down to the planet. Grant, oh, hang on, what do we do about this bomb? I know! Straight up to the ship. J. Davidson sells this moment of pure fury because it is an impotent fury. There is nothing he can do about the impending explosion. And my God, is it an explosion?
Hickox goes out speaking the kings, Inglourious Bastards. The entire basement bar scene in this movie is one of Tarantino's best and most tense sequences. In occupied France, British Commando Lieutenant Archie Hickox meets at the tavern with a fellow undercover agent, German actress Brigitte von Hammersmark. Given that he's not a native German speaker, his mannerisms and accent attract attention and arouse suspicion. But he seems to have pulled it off, right until the last moment, that is, with the Nazi soldiers imminently due to depart, when a simple hand gesture gives him away as a British soldier. Their hushed negotiations fall apart almost immediately, and they realise nobody can leave the room now that the secret is out. After a short pause, Hickox nods, sits back in his chair, and grabs a cigarette, saying, "Well, if this is it, old boy, I hope you don't mind if I go out speaking the kings." He takes a drag on his cigarette as the realisation sits in, finishes his scotch, and then kicks off the shootout that will result in the death of all but one person present in the tavern. I mean, if you're gonna die in a shootout, you may as well have a cigarette and a scotch in hand, am I right? Spike, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Many would say that Spike was the character who had the greatest arc and growth throughout Buffy the Vampire Slayer's beloved 7-season run. From all-out villain to anti-hero to genuine self-sacrificing good guy, James Marsters' Vampire stands as one of the all-time great genre TV characters. And in typical Spike fashion, he brilliantly welcomed his ultimate demise during Buffy's final ever episode. Not only did Spike know that his time was up, he embraced it and delighted in the fact that he could feel his soul. With an I love you from Buffy, Spike was more than happy to go down with the ship as he wiped out the bad guys, provided an escape route for everybody else, then stuck around to make sure that the Hellmouth fully closed up, which in turn killed him in the process. Of course, Spike would end up returning to be a part of Angel, but that didn't take away from what a cool moment his death was for Buffy fans, with Spike's act of selflessness viewed by some as being the hardest hitting of all Buffy's many, many deaths.
Limo Ride to Hell. True Lies. James Cameron's criminally underrated actioner True Lies dispatches its secondary antagonist, antiques dealer Juno Skinner, in fittingly savage fashion after she kidnaps Harry Tasker's wife Helen. While Helen and Juno are fighting in the back of a limo, Harry stages a daring attempt to get his spouse to safety before the limo plunges off the end of a destroyed bridge, because the car's being driven by a dead guy and there's no chance of stopping it. After Helen knocks Juno out, Harry flies close to the limo in a chopper and tries to grab her. We then cut back to Juno, who wakes up in the back of the limo with a dead driver and the broken end of a bridge fast approaching. Her eyes get cartoonishly wide and all she can say is, "Oh shit," before the limo careens into the ocean, presumably killing her instantly, while Helen is just barely pulled out of the limo in time.
Old Joe gets erased, Looper. Looper is an especially interesting example because the death in question is technically a suicide, albeit a result of someone being killed by a younger version of themselves. Or to be precise about it, it's a case of someone being erased from existence entirely when their younger self commits suicide. At the end of the film, young Joe desperately tries to stop his older self from committing the murder that will eventually lead to the creation of an all-powerful telekinetic crime boss. Young Joe realizes that the only way to stop old Joe from doing it is to wipe himself out, and so young Joe turns his gun around and fatally blasts himself in the chest. When old Joe realizes this, he has a few precious seconds to realize the horrifying existence-nullifying implications of his younger self's act. The fear grips his face, and after a beat, he quite literally blinks out of existence as though he'd never even walked the earth. It's a pretty awful way to go, especially when your last seconds are filled with the fear of the knowledge that in just one moment you will never have existed.
Repla Weir, Ghost in the Machine. This one, I'm afraid to say, is actually a little bit of a sad one because it's quite a definitive death and it's also a fan favourite character. Elizabeth Weir was the head of the Atlantis expedition in the Pegasus Galaxy. She'd been introduced in SG-1, was quickly recast. Jessica Steen was then recast with Tori Higginson, who took over in the lead role for Stargate Atlantis. As the show went on, and particularly into the third season, she was infected with nanites, which effectively rewrote her human self to become a human form replicator. Now, while she was still a good guy, this was a problem for the Atlantis expedition because replicators are, in a word, bad. Michelle Morgan, who had appeared in Stargate Atlantis as Fran, takes over the role of Weir. Now, it's explained away that, there was a little bit of mind transference in this and that. Really, the problem was Higginson elected not to come back for this episode. So, pressure was on Morgan to really sell, well, how do we believe as an audience that you're Weir? And she does it. She does it beautifully. At the end, everyone knows the replicators cannot be left alive. Weir walks up to the event horizon of the Stargate. She has found a new planet for the replicators to live on. She smiles at her friends, she stares an extra second at John Sheppard and Woolsey, and steps through. Her replicator friends follow her, and it was a space gate. She's floating in space. They are frozen. She knew she was going to her death.
Schultz would rather die than shake hands. Django Unchained. Christoph Waltz's Dr. Schultz lived as a legend and died as one too. He's a man of morals, and it's that which causes him to recognise when his death is the only option left. As he and his partner Django close the deal on purchasing Django's wife Broomhilda from Calvin Candy, aka the owner of the plantation and overall monster, they're walking to the door when Candy calls them back, insisting that Schultz shake his hand. After multiple refusals from Schultz, Candy pulls his trump card. In Chickasaw County, he states no deal is complete until the two parties shake hands. In this moment, Schultz realises that he cannot shake Candy's hand, and without shaking his hand, he, Django and Broomhilda will all be shot, so he creates himself a third option. He shrugs as if in resignation, walks towards Candy with an extended arm, and then boom! With a tiny gun he produces from his sleeve, he shoots Candy right in the heart. If the options were shake or die and the former is something he can never do, he may as well go out with a bang. Literally. It's even actually a bit of a 2-in-1 here with this entry, because Candy's face when he realises he's been shot is a visage for the ages. Hank Schrader, Breaking Bad. Many avid TV viewers classify Breaking Bad as the absolute greatest show in the history of modern television. And even if you don't fully agree with that viewpoint, it's hard to dispute that the series, and likely Better Call Saul too, is at least in that conversation. In a show brimming with quality episodes, the season 5 episode Ozymandias is viewed as absolute perfection. One key reason for this, of course, is how the episode gets off to a shocking start as Dean Norris's Hank Schrader is killed within the first 10 minutes. With the cat out of the bag that Hank and his partner Steve Gomez are DEA agents, Jack Welker toys with Schrader while Walter White, Hank's brother-in-law, tries to bargain with Jack. While Jack humours Walt and listens to his pleas, Hank takes a slightly different approach. Schrader finds himself being questioned by Jack on whether he should let him live, while Walter begs his family member to play along with Welker. Instead, Hank has already long realised that he's a dead man. As he puts it to White, seconds before being murdered, "You want me to beg? You're the smartest guy I ever met, and you're too stupid to see? He made up his mind 10 minutes ago." You have to give it to the guy, it's one hell of a final speech.
Khan quotes Moby Dick, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Throughout Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, legendary villain Khan frequently quotes and paraphrases Moby Dick, which makes sense given the film's clear thematic inspiration from the novel. Khan is not unlike the book's vengeful Captain Ahab, a comparison cemented in his final scene, where his ship, the Reliant, is defeated by the Enterprise, leaving him gravely wounded. In an attempt to kill his foes as well as himself, Khan activates the terraforming tech known as the Genesis device, while quoting Ahab's own vicious tirade from the end of the novel. "To the last I grapple with thee. From hell's heart I stab at thee. For hate's sake, I spit my last breath at thee." And like that, Khan appears to die seconds before the Genesis device detonates, incinerating the Reliant and Khan's remains with it. It was nothing if not a fittingly badass way for Trek's finest foe to meet his end.
Colonel Lionel Pendergast, Ethan. Not a lot of people might know this guy's name. He was never a main character, quite frankly. He was never much of a recurring character either. So, what the heck is he doing on this list? He was the commander of the Prometheus. Now, the Prometheus was Earth's first deep space interstellar hyperspace ship. It was, and I might catch a bit of flack for this one, ugly as all sin, but it knew how to basically take a punch. When the Ori, who were effectively evil ancients, started to expand their influence into the Milky Way galaxy, they encountered or sent their priors to the planet of Ethon. Now, the Prometheus with SG-1 aboard rock up to the orbit of Ethon, and they do not expect the reaction they get when a satellite in orbit starts firing at them. Now, the Prometheus is equipped with shields, but it was not equipped to deal with Ori technology. Pendergast, he is a hero in that he manages to transport his entire crew down to the planet, so it's just him on board the Prometheus, and this thing is taking a knocking. Pendergast did have every intention of beaming himself off that ship. The satellite knocked out the beaming technology, and he knows full well he ain't getting off.
Muldoon commends the raptor before his death. Jurassic Park. For all his warnings and reservations that the raptors were too dangerous to be kept alive at the park, Game Warden Robert Muldoon received exactly the death he wanted to prevent others suffering. After a power failure, the velociraptors are released, and whilst on a joint mission to return power to the park, Muldoon finds himself in the midst of the raptors. As he sees one in front of him, he raises his weapon, but he doesn't realise he's surrounded. Unfortunately, Muldoon wasn't present for Dr. Grant's earlier warning about how the raptors hunt. You stare at him and he just stares right back, and that's when the attack comes. Not from the front, but from the side, from the other two raptors you didn't even know were there. He has only the time to turn and see the other raptor at his side, realise they've outsmarted and surrounded him, and admit defeat. His last dying words are to commend the raptor, calling it a clever girl, and then proceeds to be brutally mauled to death. You know what? At least he had respect for the beast. You always were an asshole, Gorman. Aliens. James Cameron's Aliens is one of the most intense movies of all time, filled with nerve-shredding action and inevitably a ton of death. None hits harder though than the dual demise of Lieutenant Gorman and Private Vasquez. Though Gorman catches a ton of justified flack for freezing up during the xenomorph assault, he at least gets some mild redemption at the 11th hour when he and Vasquez end up trapped in a ventilation tunnel with a fleet of xenomorph drones about to swarm them. Knowing their geese are thoroughly cooked, Gorman pulls a grenade out, and in a weirdly touching moment, the pair embrace as they grip the soon-to-detonate grenade together, taking several xenomorphs with them in the process. Gorman may have been an asshole, but at least he got a relatively heroic death. Brian Griffin, Family Guy. Greatest may not be the best way to describe the death of Family Guy's Brian Griffin, yet that demise was a hugely powerful, poignant and emotional one when it occurred in Season 12's Life of Brian. Whereas some other characters featured on this list realised death was upon them and went out with a spirited bang or a big middle finger to their rivals, the death of the Griffin's family dog was a different beast altogether. As it dawns on Brian that the Grim Reaper is a calling, the pooch opts to use this moment to tell his nearest and dearest how much he appreciates them, wishes them farewell, and thanks them for giving him the best life possible. In case you missed it, Brian was shockingly mowed down by a car as he and Stewie prepared to play street hockey. Rather than played for chuckles, the damage done to Brian is handled in a more nuanced, serious way, with him taken to the vets before it's revealed that his injuries are fatal. Seeing Family Guy kill off one of its core characters was shocking enough, but it was even more jarring to see that it was a character as popular as Brian. In fact, so jarring was it, fan backlash led to the canine being brought back 2 episodes later thanks to some time travel shenanigans.
Heru'ur, the serpent's venom. Now, I'm not gonna lie guys, I enjoyed this one. Heru'ur was not a very nice person. One of the Goa'uld system lords, he had been around for thousands of years and had amassed a huge amount of power in his time. As we went forward in SG-1, some system lords gained more power, some started to lose it. Apophis started to grow and grow and grow. Heru'ur started to kind of lose some of his power. Heru'ur had proposed an alliance with Apophis, and as part of this, he had managed to capture Teal'c. Teal'c was the Shova who had managed to turn against Apophis, so this was a great gift. Thankfully, Ragnar, who was the Jaffa warrior who actually kidnapped Teal'c for Heru'ur, is convinced by Teal'c to turn against him. They manage to escape in a glider. From Heru'ur's point of view, what he delivers is a dud gag. Apophis is less than pleased. Apophis decloaks a fleet. Now this was brand new for Stargate. We hadn't seen this kind of technology before. Neither had Heru'ur. He doesn't roar, he doesn't scream, He just looks out the window and then he just looks down because he knows it. He's dead.
Just Drive, Thelma and Louise. Ridley Scott's Thelma and Louise touts one of the most famous and widely parodied endings in cinema history, as the titular best friends on the run are finally cornered by the FBI on the edge of the Grand Canyon. Rather than go to prison or even face the electric chair for murdering a man who attempted to rape Thelma, she suggests they keep going, and the pair exchange tearful glances as they each recognize the full extent of what that means. Louise then drives the car off the Grand Canyon edge, hurtling through the sky before the image freeze frames and fades to white mid-air. The precise outcome technically unknown, but the grimly triumphant implication clear.
Lord Beckett's slow-motion death march, Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End. There's nothing quite like watching a man go down with his ship, and that the villainous Lord Beckett certainly does at the end of the third Pirates of the Caribbean film. Beckett is left paralysed with shock and fear when his ship, the Endeavour, is double-teamed by both the Black Pearl and the Flying Dutchman. As the Endeavour is railed from both sides by cannonballs and Beckett's men begin to abandon ship, Beckett calmly walks through the vessel as wooden debris explodes around him. His facial expression changes to one of terrified recognition mere moments before the remnants of the Endeavour are engulfed by a gigantic explosion, catapulting him into the ocean and killing him instantly. When your best laid plans backfire and you're all out of contingencies, there's nothing left to do but simply accept your fate. Carl Grimes, The Walking Dead. Across The Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead, and The Walking Dead World Beyond, Carl Grimes is one of the rare characters who is well aware that their inevitable death is well and truly on the horizon. For Chandler Riggs' character, his death gave The Walking Dead an emotional shot in the arm at a time when the series and its characters needed it most. Having been bitten on the stomach, Carl knows that there's no way to avoid what's coming. It's not like with a limb where you can amputate it. You can't just cut off someone's stomach. Prior to this reveal, we see Carl stepping up to protect the residents of Alexandria from Negan and his saviors, with the young man making the bold decision to interrupt as Negan is about to bomb this one-time safe haven. This allows the Alexandrians to be led to safety, and it's only at the end of this entire ordeal, at the closing moments of the episode How It's Gotta Be, that Carl reveals that he's been bitten. The moment is beautifully delivered and explains why Carl had had what felt like a new sense of purpose for the prior 50 minutes. The next episode is a real punch in the gut as we see Carl say his emotional goodbyes while death slowly circles in. Iron Man saves everyone, but not himself. Avengers Endgame. We're all too aware that the MCU's beloved Tony Stark kicked the bucket in Endgame, but in our grief it's easy to forget the exact moments that led up to his demise. Thanos, with his smug little smile and self-assured tone, once again states that he is inevitable, clicking his fingers together only to realise that he's been duped, and across from him the stones are all resting in Tony Stark's capable hands. With a click of his fingers, he erases Thanos and his army. He knows full well from what he's seen before that his chances of survival are pretty much non-existent. So when he takes that breath and looks at Thanos before making his final saving move, he knows he is condemning himself to death. After all is said and done, when he finally lets go as Pepper assures him that it's all okay and he can rest now, it's a very emotional moment for all of us, made better by his sheer determination as he made the decision to go through with it. Whether he clicked or not, he would die either way, but this way he died once again as a hero. Stansfield receives Matilda's gift, Leon the Professional. Luc Besson's Leon ends in tragic fashion as the titular assassin is gunned down by the psychopathic DEA agent Norman Stansfield, mere feet from freedom. However, this time the bad guy doesn't get away with his murderous act scot-free. As Stansfield watches Leon die, he hands him a gift from young Matilda, which turns out to be a grenade pin. A confused Stansfield then opens up a dead Leon's vest to find a cluster of armed grenades. With little time to react or really do much of anything, he simply says, "Shh," with a certain darkly comic resignation before being blown to pieces. Given that Stansfield spends the entire movie being an 11 on the intensity scale, it's ironic that he's so strangely calm about his impending death.
Detective John Sheppard, Vegas. Vegas is the penultimate episode of Stargate Atlantis, and it's a bit of an oddity in that it exists entirely in an alternate reality. Unfortunately, Atlantis had been cancelled during its 5th season, which meant that at the close of that season, that was it. There was no more, at the time, expanding of the story. So they had to find a way to wrap up a lot of arcs really, really quickly, and arguably they did a very good job. The Wraith had been the main bad guys of Stargate Atlantis for its entire run. In this alternate universe, a Wraith has discovered the location of Earth and is on Earth, trying to find a way to send the coordinates to the prime universe, our own universe. Now, there is a plucky detective following him, John Sheppard. Of course, he doesn't have the knowledge as to what a Wraith is. So when he discovers the creature, turns up and starts shooting at it, he's somewhat surprised when it sort of walked towards him. The Wraith is defeated, although not before it manages to send the coordinates to the prime universe, setting up the last episode. It does also manage to get a fatal shot in against John Sheppard. We had known for the entire 5 seasons that Sheppard, any version of Sheppard, was a huge fan of Johnny Cash. So as Lonely Man plays, John Sheppard dies on the sand. Considering it's an alternate reality, it's surprisingly emotional.
We Die. The Last Starfighter. Cult classic 1984 sci-fi film The Last Starfighter touts one of the all-time finest and most dignified acceptances of a violently explosive death in movie history. When the villainous Lord Krill realizes that the mothership's guidance controls have been disabled by hero Alex Rogan and the ship is irreversibly locked into the gravitational pull of Rylos's moon, a fellow Kadan officer asks him what they're going to do. In the most calm tone imaginable, a mournful Krill waits for his monocle to swing around to his eye, before replying, "We die." Seconds later, the ship crashes into the moon and explodes in a gigantic fireball. It's a fitting death for a smart and competent villain, stoically accepting his fate rather than raging helplessly against the unavoidable tide of fate.
Drinking scotch with the monster, The Thing. The ending of The Thing is pretty divisive by virtue of its uncertainty. John Carpenter himself said that he wanted the ending to be something you could think on and work out for yourself, and that's part of what makes it so iconic. In the final scene, our 2 remaining characters, Schultz and MacReady, settle down in the snow as the station burns. It's pretty widely agreed that Schultz has become the Thing, as signalled by a range of signs such as how his breath is not visible in the freezing air like MacReady's is. It's implied that MacReady knows this too. That's what makes MacReady's final moments all the more incredible. As he slumps down further in the snow, his beard frosting over, he accepts that death is coming. He sits fearlessly in front of the alien that has killed all his colleagues. He knows that nothing matters, that both him and Childs or the Thing are going to freeze to death pretty soon, but he embraces it and shares a bottle with his end-of-life associate. It's a pretty badass way to go, just waiting out the inevitable in the frozen expanse, potentially sat across from an extraterrestrial killer. The terrible stepdad gets crushed to death, San Andreas. One of the most hilarious tropes in blockbuster movies, particularly disaster films, is the tendency for an asshole character to get their comeuppance in the form of an extremely brutal, arguably excessive death. This is certainly true for San Andreas' stepfather character Daniel Radic, who, when trapped amid the chaos of the earthquake, decides to save himself rather than his girlfriend's daughter. He's also later seen causing the death of another man in order to save himself, but once he makes it to the Golden Gate Bridge, his number finally comes up. A container ship ends up being catapulted into the bridge by a giant tidal wave, breaking the bridge in half, but not before Daniel is crushed to death by one of the falling shipping containers. To maximise audience satisfaction, we linger on Daniel as he helplessly watches the ship coming his way, and looks up as the container is dropped on him, knowing there is absolutely nothing he can do about it. Audiences are simple. We love to see terrible step-parents get crushed by shipping containers, and this film certainly delivered.
Apophis. Enemies. Peter Williams was underrated, I believe, as Apophis in Stargate SG-1, because for quite a while he was the primary villain. So when Apophis was facing his final moments, you had nearly 5 seasons of weight behind it. Apophis manages to capture Teal'c, but both Apophis's mothership and SG-1's Teltec are flung into a far-off galaxy thanks to those little spidery gits, the replicators. Apophis's ship is quickly overrun and his men are slaughtered by these small little creatures. Now SG-1, having the experience of dealing with the replicators before, managed to get off the ship with Teal'c, which leaves Apophis standing in his bridge covered in a personal shield, which is subsequently covered with replicators themselves. The ship has been set to hit the atmosphere of a lonely planet, which will cause everything to explode, both Goa'uld and replicators. Apophis does everything he can to stop the ship from moving and realizes in that moment there's nothing he can do. Now, we've seen Apophis die a few times in Stargate, but this one is satisfying.
Olenna Tyrell, Game of Thrones. Not only did Olenna Tyrell know that she was about to die, she went out like a complete and utter badass when meeting her maker in Game of Thrones' The Queen's Justice episode. As part of Cersei's unrelenting power play during Thrones' 7th season, the House of Tyrell is brought to its knees and it's down to Jaime Lannister to personally off the Queen of Thorns, Olenna Tyrell. It's safe to say he's not entirely happy about killing off an old frail woman, so he compromises by offering her a quick, pain-free death by poison. After getting reassurances that the poison is both effective and as painless as possible, Dame Diana Rigg's character promptly drinks the sinister potion, then reveals that it was she who ordered the death of Joffrey, Jaime's born-out-of-incest son. Not only does she just casually reveal this to the Kingslayer, she gleefully goes into the specifics of Joffrey's death, all whilst Joffrey's father, Jaime, just helplessly watches on. And in one final kicker, Olenna smugly makes it known how she wants Cersei to be made well aware who was pulling the strings that led to Joffrey's death. Going out with a bang, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. This one is definitely a bit different from the rest. It's a hopeless but emotional ending when our two protagonists realise that they've reached the end of the line, after finding that the straight life wasn't for them and embracing the dangers of the criminal career. After stealing a payroll and some mules, Butch and Sundance find themselves once again at odds with the law because a kid grasses them up. Both criminals are injured in a shootout with the police and retreat into a nearby shack, coming to realise there's no way out of this. Both men are in a bad way, and the law has them surrounded, but whilst it's clear they both know this is where their journey ends, neither of them will admit it. Butch floats the idea that their next destination should be Australia, looking forward to the future even with the knowledge they'll never actually make it. It makes the ending even more poignant as they emerge from the building, all guns a-blazing, as they walk into their own doom. Adriana Lacerva, The Sopranos. The death of Adriana was not only one of The Sopranos' most brutal moments, it was also the perfect example of just how cruel and clinical this world was. When reflecting on the series' 6 seasons, Adriana was one of the most fascinating, multifaceted characters. So when she was murdered in the penultimate episode of the show's 5th season, it left jaws agape as audiences struggled to believe that The Sopranos would kill off someone who had been such a mainstay of the series. By the time of that fateful long-term parking episode, Adriana had finally told her fiancé Christopher that she had been working as a mole for the FBI. Chris near enough killed her himself, but then calmer heads prevailed and the pair were set to move away and enter witness protection. Adriana would later get a phone call from a frantic Tony Soprano, who explained that Chris had been hospitalized after trying to take his own life. When ever-lovable Silvio turns up to give Adriana a lift to her beau's bedside, it soon becomes painfully clear what is really happening. While the audience may have twigged already, it's heartbreaking to slowly see Adriana realise that she's about to be whacked, as Sil veers into some woodland and ultimately shoots her dead, signalling how Christopher had valued his mob family over his bride-to-be. Roy Batty's Time to Die, Blade Runner. Now, you'd be right to mention that Blade Runner's Roy Batty is a replicant and therefore not technically alive in the strict human sense of the word. But given that one of the film's key themes is the idea of a synthetic human evoking more humanity than an actual flesh and blood person, it's fitting that Batty's poetic demise is one of the most memorable and affecting in cinema history. The replicants know from the jump that their built-in 4-year lifespan is coming to an end, though this comes home to roost in highly poignant fashion at film's end. After Batty rescues Deckard from falling to his death, he delivers the death soliloquy to end all death soliloquies, lamenting the ephemeral nature of existence, whether human or replicant, and realising it's now his time to die. A short description doesn't really do it justice because it's such a fantastic speech. It's so beautiful.
Lantash. Last Stand. Lantash was a Tok'ra symbiont who was introduced to SG-1 quite early. This was our first experience of the Tok'ra, who were the same species as the Goa'uld, but suddenly, wait a minute, there are good guys with glowing eyes? As we got to know Lantash and Martouf better, they became our spokesman, more or less, for the Tok'ra. It was heartbreaking then when Martouf ended up being killed after he was brainwashed into becoming an Ashrak. Lantash did, however, survive that, and was implanted in Lieutenant Kevin Elliott, a member of the SGC. This was supposed to be a short-term solution because they needed Lantash to have a host. Unfortunately, the base that they were on quickly came under attack from the Goa'uld. Now, there was something of a safe haven / communications base 22 miles from the Tok'ra base. SG-1 and Kevin / Lantash begin their run through the undergrowth, but it's pretty obvious pretty quickly that Elliott and Lantash cannot make this run. They were both injured, and Lantash does not have the strength to repair his host. The episode closes not with a battle, it ends with the camera panning in on Elliott and Lantash, knowing this is the end, and it fades to black.
Dignam's Revenge, The Departed. For a moment, it seemed like Martin Scorsese's remake of Infernal Affairs is going to deliver the same bleak ending as the original, with undercover cop Billy Costigan being killed, and the mob's mole inside the police force, Colin Sullivan, getting away scot-free. And though Costigan does indeed die, Scorsese sensibly decided to deliver a crowd-pleasing comeuppance for the last villain standing, as Sullivan returns home to his apartment to find hot-headed former Staff Sergeant Sean Dignam waiting for him. By taking one look at Dignam, who is shaking with rage while pointing a gun at him and wearing gloves and white crime scene booties, Sullivan knows his number is up and there is no way out. After a tense pause, Sullivan lets out a resigned, "Okay," and Dignam shoots him in the head, killing him instantly.
Hans Gruber takes a fall, Die Hard. Villain death scenes don't get much better than Hans Gruber in the original Die Hard. After proving himself such an intelligent and resourceful antagonist, Gruber meets a violent end as he clings desperately to Holly's watch while dangling out the side of the Nakatomi Plaza. After a struggle, John McClane manages to unclasp the watch from her wrist, allowing the laws of gravity to do the rest. Gruber's death is iconic for lots of reasons, but one above all the rest being the superb decision to shoot the scene in slow motion, allowing audiences to linger on Gruber's realization that he's about to fall several hundred feet to the unforgiving concrete below. It's a death scene made even better by the fact that Rickman's terrifying expression was kinda sorta real. While shooting the scene against a blue screen backdrop, Rickman was told he'd be dropped onto an airbag on the count of 3. But the director decided to have him dropped on the count of 1 instead, ensuring Gruber's final "oh no" expression is informed by the actor's very real fear and surprise. Sneaky, but clever.
Samantha Carter, The Last Man. Now, similar to the first entry on this list, you might be wondering, well, hang on, first of all, how did you manage to pin down one of Samantha Carter's death scenes? But this one carried more weight than I was expecting. In Stargate Atlantis, through a series of unfortunate events, John Sheppard accidentally wakes up in the far future. Now, while he's wandering around a deserted Atlantis, he encounters a hologram of Rodney McKay, who then tells him the story of what happened while he was away. The Wraith quickly took over the Pegasus galaxy, starting to destroy pretty much any life forms they found. They were led by Michael, who was played by Connor Schneer, who was on a sabbatical from Star Trek Enterprise. The IOA, the International Oversight Advisory, ordered that the Atlantis expedition be shut down because they didn't want to devote more resources to protecting a galaxy nowhere near home. Carter was not interested in following this order. She took command of the Daedalus-class ship, the Phoenix, and proceeded to effectively wage a one-woman war against the Wraith, and she was very successful for a while. However, Michael tricked her into arriving into an ambush. There was no way out. The camera pans in on Amanda Tapping's face. Like that, it's quiet, even with the explosions going on around her. There's no gung-ho look on her face. It's just, this is it. This is the end.
Tot gets melted. Raiders of the Lost Ark. Death scenes don't get much more iconic, satisfying, or freaking gruesome than the demise of Gestapo agent Arnold Tot at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. When the Nazis open the Ark of the Covenant, anyone who keeps their eyes open is subjected to the wrath of God, as spirits and flames kill each and every one of them, sparing only Indy and Marion, who kept their eyes closed. In Tot's case, he screams in terror as he watches a nearby Nazi officer's face melt, mere seconds before his own face melts directly off his skull, in a scene that's given children nightmares for over 40 years. Tot had a few precious seconds to process what was about to happen to him, which must have made his death that much more terrifying. You love to see it.
Max laughs himself to death, A View to a Kill. Hans Gruber isn't the only legendary movie villain to take an unforgettable fall. we'd be remiss not to mention A View to a Kill's deranged antagonist Max Zorin, played with campy glee by the great Christopher Walken. The film's climax takes place atop the Golden Gate Bridge, as Bond and Zorin take part in a perilous high-wire axe fight. In the end, 007 of course manages to get the better of Zorin, who is left clinging to the side of the bridge's framework. As he begins to lose his grip, Zorin hilariously lets out a maniacal cackle, as if he's finding some sort of perverse amusement that his life is about to end. A mere second later, he slips from the framework and plunges hundreds of feet into the San Francisco Bay below. Say what you will about A View to a Kill, but Walken's deliciously unhinged performance is surely the easy highlight. O.P. Winston, Sons of Anarchy. For many, they're still not over the death of Ryan Hurst's O.P. Winston in Sons of Anarchy, even after all the years since the show's Laying Pipe episode first aired. Jax's bestest bud and one of the most loyal members of the group, O.P. went out like a true hero. When Damon Pope had Jax over the proverbial barrel, O.P. stepped up to make himself the sacrificial lamb that Pope was seeking. The deal on the table is that Pope will let 2 sons have their freedom so long as one of the other members gives up their life. It's decided by Jax that he will offer himself up as the sacrifice here, yet O.P. forcibly makes himself the one to die as he lands a headbutt on the sergeant, a move that automatically makes him the one to be on the receiving end of a 4-on-1 beating that was designed to end in death. To O.P., this was the ultimate honour, the perfect encapsulation of what his brothers meant to him and his opportunity to do what he deemed the right thing for the greater good. As soon as the moment arose, O.P. took his opportunity to greet death head on. True legend behaviour.
Clifford antagonizes the Sicilian. True romance. And finally, we have one of the most brilliantly written and acted death scenes in cinema history, from Tony Scott's Quentin Tarantino-penned crime thriller, True Romance. The film revolves around newlyweds Clarence and Alabama, who find themselves on the run from the mob after accidentally stealing a shipment of drugs. This brings them into the realm of mob boss Vincenzo Cocotti, who, in an attempt to track the couple down, pays a visit to Clarence's father, Clifford. Clifford, obviously having no intention of giving up his son's location, and being well aware he's a dead man either way, decides to cut the torture short by effectively goading Cocotti into murdering him. In a glorious monologue, he provokes the evidently racist Cocotti by suggesting that Italians are descended from black people, calling him part eggplant. In turn, an enraged Cocotti shoots him dead, his own racism having effectively been used against him. Genius.